Hi and welcome. He thought he had destroyed her. When powerful CEO Lucian Rill left his wife Isader for a younger model, he wrote her off as a casualty of his ambition. He arrives at a glittering gala with his mistress Seraphine, expecting to be the king of the room. But a ghost from his past is there, and she's not the broken woman he remembers. Isader is back, beautiful and radiating a confidence that terrifies him. This isn't just a story of a chance encounter. It's a story of a woman rising from the ashes and a man about to get burned. The silence in his older minimalist penthouse was a living entity. It breathed in the scent of white lies and exhaled the faint sterile aroma of glass cleaner. For the past year, since the divorce from Lucien Rahl had been finalized, this silence had been her most constant companion. It was a stark contrast to the life she'd known, a life filled with the booming echo of Lucian's voice, the clatter of his ambition, and the suffocating weight of his expectations. He had been a man who took up all the space in a room, in a marriage, in a life. Now all his older had was space, acres of it, in the form of high ceilings, polished marble floors, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic yet impersonal view of the city lights. Tonight the silence felt particularly heavy. On the bespoke velvet-covered chaise lounge lay a gown the color of a midnight sky, shimmering with hand-stitched crystals that mimicked a constellation. It was a custom piece from a designer whose name was whispered in reverent tones in the circles she used to frequent. The invitation, a thick cream-colored card with embossed gold lettering, sat beside it. The annual Blackwood Charity Gala, an event she and Lucien had once co-chaired, an event she had every reason to avoid. Her therapist, Dr. Marlowe, had called it exposure therapy, a gentle clinical term for what felt like walking into a den of beautifully dressed lions. "You can't stay in the cage, Isolde," she'd said, her voice calm and steady through the phone. "Even if the door is open and the cage is gilded." Isolde had traced the rim of her porcelain teacup, the cage analogy hitting a little too close to home. Lucien hadn't just left her. He had constructed a narrative around their parting. He was the dynamic visionary held back by a quiet, unambitious wife. She was fragile, unsuited for the relentless pace of his world. He had been gentle in his public statements, painting a picture of a sad but amicable parting, a kindness that was in itself a form of cruelty. It erased her, rendered her a footnote in the grand story of Lucien Rahl. And then there was Seraphine. The ink on the divorce papers had barely been dry when photos of Lucien with Seraphine veil had surfaced. Seraphine was everything Isolde wasn't. Young, fiercely ambitious, a rising star in the very marketing firm Lucien's company had recently acquired. She was a mirror image of Lucien's own drive, a perfect accessory for the next chapter of his life. The world saw them as a power couple in the making. Isolde saw the painful cliché of her own life. She walked over to the window, the city sprawling beneath her like a carpet of scattered jewels. She had spent the last year rebuilding not just her life, but herself. The woman who had been married to Lucien had slowly eroded her own desires and dreams, sanded down to make space for his. She had been a supportive wife, a gracious hostess, the silent partner in his success. Now she was just Isolde, and she was still figuring out who that was. She had started taking pottery classes, finding a strange solace in the messy tactile process of shaping clay. She had reconnected with old college friends, their laughter a balm on her bruised soul. She had even started sketching out a business plan, a small, quiet dream of opening a boutique floral design studio, something Lucien would have dismissed as a hobby. The gala was a test, not for them, not for the world, but for her. Could she walk back into that world, the one that had discarded her, and not fall apart? Could she face the whispers, the pitying glances, the triumphant smirk she was sure she'd see on Seraphine's face? Could she see Lucien, the man who had shared her bed for a decade, the man she had loved with a fierce and quiet devotion, and feel anything other than the hollow ache of betrayal? A memory sharp and unwelcome pierced the quiet. A few years ago, at this very gala, she'd worn a red dress. Lucian had told her she looked nice, his eyes already scanning the room for someone more important to talk to. Later that night, he had closed a 7-figure deal. His energy electric, infectious. He had pulled her into a dark alcove, his lips crashing down on hers, not with passion, but with the overflow of his own success. "We did it, Izzy," he'd murmured as if she'd been in the boardroom with him. She had felt like a trophy then, a pretty object to be displayed and occasionally admired. She looked at the midnight blue gown again. It was beautiful, but it was also armor. Tonight, she wouldn't be a trophy. She wouldn't be a ghost. She would be Isolde. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the city lights blurring into a watercolor of defiant sparks. The silence in the penthouse didn't feel like emptiness anymore. It felt like a held breath, the calm before she stepped out of the cage. She would go, not for them, not for Dr. Marlowe, for herself. She needed to know if the woman she was becoming was strong enough to face the woman she had been. The Blackwood Hotel was a bastion of old-world opulence, a place where money wasn't just spent, it was curated. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, dripped light onto acres of polished marble. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low hum of influential voices. For a moment, standing at the grand entrance of the ballroom, Isolde felt a familiar wave of vertigo. This had been her world. Yet she felt like an outsider looking in, a ghost returning to a feast she was no longer invited to. She had spent 2 hours getting ready, a meticulous process that was less about vanity and more about building a fortress. Her hair, a rich chestnut brown, was swept up in an elegant chignon, revealing the delicate line of her neck and a pair of sapphire earrings that had been a gift from her grandmother. The midnight blue gown fit her as if it were a second skin. Its dark hue, a stark contrast to the sea of jewel tones and metallics in the room. Her makeup was understated, emphasizing her large, expressive eyes. She looked, she thought, with a detached sense of surprise. Beautiful, but it was a different kind of beauty than the one Lucian had preferred. He had liked her in pastels, in soft flowing fabrics that made her look ethereal, almost translucent. This look was bolder. It had weight. It had presence. As she stepped into the ballroom, a few heads turned. She saw the flicker of recognition in their eyes, followed by a subtle widening of surprise. This was not the mousy, heartbroken Isolde Merrick they had read about in the society pages. She kept her chin high, her posture straight, and walked towards the bar, her heels clicking with a confidence she didn't entirely feel. She could feel the whispers starting like ripples in a pond. "Is that? I thought she'd moved to the country. She looks different." She ordered a glass of champagne, her hand steady as she took the flute from the bartender. She took a small sip, the bubbles, a sharp cold shock on her tongue. She scanned the room, a practiced habit from her years as Lucien's wife. She saw the mayor holding court by the silent auction table, a tech billionaire laughing with a senator, a famous actress posing for photos. It was a constellation of power, a universe she had once navigated with effortless grace. Now every interaction felt like a potential minefield. "Isa, my God, is that you?" She turned to see a familiar face. It was Rowena Vale, a woman who sat on 3 different charity boards with her and whose daughter, ironically, was Seraphine. Rowena was a formidable woman in her 60s with a sharp wit and an even sharper eye for social maneuvering. Her expression was one of genuine astonishment. "Rowena," Isolde said, her voice smoother than she expected. "It's been a while, darling. It's been an eternity." "We all thought you'd run off to a convent," Rowena said, her voice a low conspiratorial whisper. She looked Isolde up and down, her gaze lingering on the gown. "Well, the convent's loss is our gain. You look absolutely spectacular. Vengeance, my dear, is a dish best served in couture." Isolde offered a small non-committal smile. I'm not seeking vengeance, Rowena. I'm just living my life. Rowena's eyes twinkled. Of course you are, and it seems to be agreeing with you. She leaned in closer. He's here, you know, with her. She said the last word with a delicate moue of distaste, a surprising crack in her usually composed facade. It was a well-known secret that Rowena was not her daughter's biggest fan, seeing her as a crassly ambitious social climber. I assumed they would be, said, taking another sip of champagne. She was determined not to let Rowena's gossip rattle her. Well, you're handling it with more grace than I. Wold, Rowena said, patting his older arm. If you need a human shield, just let me know. I'm an expert at blocking unwanted advances. And even more unwanted ex-husbands. Isolde felt a genuine smile touch her lips for the first time that evening. Thank you, Rowena. I'll keep that in mind. As Rowena moved on, Isolde felt a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just a ghost here. She was a woman with allies, however unlikely. She started to move through the room, not hiding in the shadows, but not seeking the spotlight either. She exchanged pleasantries with a few acquaintances, their reactions a mixture of surprise and cautious warmth. The pity she had dreaded was there, but it was overshadowed by a grudging respect. She was here. She was standing on her own 2 feet, and then she saw them. They were across the room near the stage where the band was setting up. Lucian looked as handsome as ever, his custom-tailored tuxedo fitting his broad shoulders perfectly. He was laughing, his head thrown back, the picture of a man at the top of his game, and on his arm was Seraphine. She was wearing a fire-engine red dress that was both stunning and aggressive. It was a dress that screamed, "Look at me." Her blonde hair was sleek and straight, her makeup flawless. They looked perfect together. A power couple, a brand. As if sensing her gaze, Lucian's head turned, his eyes scanned the crowd. A casual king of the castle glance, and then they found her. The laughter died on his lips. His smile froze, then vanished. For a split second, she saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen in years. Shock. Pure, unadulterated shock. It was as if he was seeing a ghost after all, but not the pale weeping ghost of his memory. This was something else entirely, something he didn't recognize, something he couldn't control. The feast, it seemed, was about to be interrupted. The moment Lucian's eyes locked on Isolde, the vibrant energy of the ballroom seemed to dim, the sound of 100 conversations fading into a dull, distant roar. It was a strange, suspended moment in time. A silent movie playing out across a crowded room. Seraphine, sensing the sudden shift in his demeanor, followed his gaze. Her perfectly glossed lips tightened into a thin line, her blue eyes, usually so full of calculated charm, turning as hard and cold as ice. The power couple, the picture of modern success, stood frozen, their united front fractured by the unexpected presence of the past. For his soldier, it was an out-of-body experience. She watched them from across the room, her champagne flute held in a grip that was suddenly too tight. She saw the confusion on Lucian's face, the way his brow furrowed as he took in her appearance. This was not the woman he had left. The woman he had left wore cardigans and sensible shoes. She cried in the car after dropping him at the airport. She made his favorite meals and never complained when he worked late. This woman in her midnight blue armor was a stranger. And then the moment broke. Lucian, ever the master of controlling a situation, composed himself. He murmured something to Seraphine, his hand possessively on the small of her back, and started to walk towards Isolde. It was a power move, a clear demonstration that he was not intimidated, that he was in charge. Seraphine, her smile now a brittle painted-on thing, moved with him, a queen protecting her king. His oldest heart began to pound against her ribs, a frantic trapped bird. Her first instinct was to flee, to turn and walk away, to melt back into the shadows. But then she remembered Dr. Marlowe's words, Rowena's offer of a human shield, the feel of the cool, solid clay in her hands. She was not the same woman. She would not run. She took a slow, deliberate breath and turned to face them as they approached. Her expression a carefully constructed mask of polite neutrality. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. "Isolde?" Lucien said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that had once been her favorite sound in the world. Now it just sounded hollow. "I have to say I'm surprised to see you here." "Lucien," she replied, her own voice steady, calm. She met his gaze directly, not flinching. The invitation was for a good cause. "I thought it was time I started supporting them again." She let her eyes drift to the woman on his arm. "Seraphine, you look well." It was a masterstroke of understated power. She had acknowledged Seraphine, but she hadn't given her the satisfaction of being the center of attention. She had also subtly reminded Lucien that this world of charity and influence, had once been hers too. Seraphine's smile was tight, her eyes flashing with a competitive fire. "Isolde, it's nice to see you out and about. We were so worried about you." The "we" was a deliberate barb, a way of aligning herself with Lucien, of creating a united front. The worried was pure condescension. "That's very thoughtful of you," Isolde said, her voice still infuriatingly calm. "But as you can see, I'm perfectly fine." An awkward silence descended, thick with unspoken history and simmering resentment. Lucien, who hated any situation he couldn't control, shifted his weight, his eyes darting around to see who was watching, and people were watching. The encounter was a piece of high-stakes theater, and the audience was rapt. "Well," Lucien said, trying to regain his footing, "it's good to see you looking healthy." It was a clumsy, patronizing choice of words, and they both knew it. He was trying to reassert the old dynamic, the one where he was the strong, capable one, and she was the fragile, delicate one. Isolde's mask of neutrality didn't slip. But a new light entered her eyes, a spark of something that looked dangerously like amusement. "Healthy, is that what you call it?" "I was thinking more along the lines of liberated." The word hung in the air between them, a challenge. It was a word that completely dismantled the narrative Lucien had so carefully constructed. A liberated woman was not a victim. A liberated woman was not pining for her lost love. A liberated woman was a threat. Seraphine's hand tightened on Lucien's arm. "Well, we're so happy for you. Lucien has been working so hard, and it's a relief to know you're not struggling. Isolde repeated the word, letting it hang in the air for a moment. She then gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "No, Seraphine, I'm not struggling. I'm building." She paused, letting the statement land. "But I don't want to keep you. I'm sure you have many important people to talk to." With a final polite nod, she turned and walked away, leaving them standing in her wake. She didn't look back, but she could feel their eyes on her. A mixture of shock, anger, and something else she couldn't quite decipher. It was a small victory, a quiet reclaiming of her own power. But it felt monumental. The collision had happened, and she hadn't just survived. She had walked away unscathed, leaving the wreckage behind her. The gilded cage was starting to feel very far away. The moment his soldier turned her back on Lucien and Seraphine, it was as if a spell had been broken. The low hum of the party seemed to rush back in, but it was different now, charged with a new electric undercurrent. Isolde could feel it on her skin, a prickling awareness of being the center of a storm she had just unleashed. She walked not back to the bar, but towards a quieter corner of the room near a set of French doors that led out to a terrace. She needed a moment to breathe, to let the adrenaline that had surged through her veins subside. She didn't look back, but she knew what was happening. She could picture it perfectly. Lucien, his face a thundercloud of controlled fury, would be steering Seraphine away, his grip on her arm a little too tight. He would be smiling, but his eyes would be cold, scanning the room for any sign of mockery or pity. Seraphine, for her part, would be trying to recover her composure, her mask of confident ambition slipping to reveal the insecurity beneath. Their perfect polished image had been tarnished, not by a dramatic outburst, but by a quiet, unyielding display of self-possession. Isolde reached the French doors and leaned against the cool glass, her back to the room. She closed her eyes, her carefully constructed composure threatening to crumble. The encounter had taken more out of her than she had expected. It was one thing to rehearse the scene in her mind, to practice the lines with Dr. Marlowe. It was another thing entirely to stand in front of the man who had broken her heart and the woman who had replaced her and not scream or cry or run. That, a low voice said from beside her, was the most magnificent display of social jiu-jitsu I have ever witnessed. Isolde's eyes snapped open. Standing next to her was a man she vaguely recognized from the periphery of her old life. His name was Thane Ashford, a successful architect known for his innovative, sustainable designs. He was handsome in a rugged, unconventional way with kind eyes and a smile that seemed to reach them. "I'm sorry," Isolde said, her voice a little shaky. "Don't be," he said, his smile widening. "You just took on the king and his consort and walked away without a scratch. In this room, that's the equivalent of slaying a dragon." He gestured with his glass towards the center of the ballroom. "Look." His soldier turned, her eyes following his gaze. The whispers had become a tangible force in the room. Heads were bent together, eyes darting towards Lucien and Seraphine, then back to her. The pity she had dreaded was gone, replaced by something else. Curiosity, respect, even a little fear. She had shifted the power dynamic of the entire room. She was no longer Lucien Rawle's sad, discarded ex-wife. She was a woman of mystery, a woman with a story that was clearly not over. "They looked like they just swallowed a bee," Thane said, a note of amusement in his voice. Issa looked back at Lucien and Seraphine. They were standing with a group of people, but their smiles were strained, their laughter forced. Lucien's hand was still on Seraphine's back, but it looked less like a gesture of affection and more like he was holding her in place. Seraphine was nodding along to whatever was being said, but her eyes kept flicking around the room, a hunted look in them. "I didn't mean to cause a scene," Is said, her voice barely a whisper. "You didn't," Thane replied, his voice gentle. "You just refused to play the part they had written for you, and in doing so, you reminded everyone in this room that they're all wearing masks." He took a sip of his drink. "It's refreshing." Isolde looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. There was no pity in his eyes, no agenda, just a quiet understanding. It was a look she hadn't received from a man in a very long time. "Why are you talking to me?" she asked, the question more blunt than she intended. He chuckled. "Because I've always admired your taste in art. I saw the collection you curated for the Children's Hospital benefit a few years ago. It was brilliant. Unconventional, but brilliant." His older was taken aback. It was a small thing, but it was a part of her, a part of the woman she had been before Lucien, a part he had dismissed as a nice little hobby. "Thank you," she said, a genuine warmth spreading through her chest. I enjoyed doing that. You have a good eye," he said simply. "So, are you going to stay and enjoy the show, or are you going to make a dramatic exit?" Isolde considered his question. The old Isolde would have fled. She would have taken her small victory and run back to the safety of her silent penthouse. But the woman she was becoming, the woman who had just faced down her past, was not so easily frightened. "I think," she said, a slow smile spreading across her face, "I'll stay. The music is about to start, and I haven't danced in a very long time." Thane's smile mirrored her own. "In that case," he said, extending his hand, "may I have this dance?" As his older took his hand and let him lead her to the dance floor, She could feel the eyes of the entire room on her. But for the first time, she didn't care. The whispers could continue. The masks could stay on. She was done with hiding. She was ready to dance. The band struck up a slow, soulful melody, and as Thashford led his older onto the dance floor, a collective, silent gasp seemed to ripple through the ballroom. It was a bold, declarative act, a public alignment with the woman who had just become the most talked-about person at the gala. Across the room, Lucien watched, his jaw tight, his knuckles white as he gripped his champagne flute. This was not part of the plan. Isolde was supposed to be a ghost, a fleeting, awkward memory. She was not supposed to be radiant, confident, and certainly not in the arms of another man. "Who the hell is that?" Seraphine hissed, her voice a venomous whisper in Lucien's ear. Her carefully constructed composure was beginning to fray at the edges, her red dress suddenly looking garish and desperate. "Thane Ashford," Lucien replied, his voice clipped. "An architect." He made the words sound like an insult. "And what is he doing with her?" Seraphine demanded, her eyes fixed on the dancing couple. Isolde looked graceful, elegant, her midnight blue gown swirling around her as Thane expertly guided her across the floor. They looked natural together. "I have no idea," Lucien lied. But he did have an idea. He knew exactly what was happening. Isolde was not playing by the rules. She was not behaving like the heartbroken, fragile woman he had so carefully painted for the world. She was fighting back, not with tears and accusations, but with something far more dangerous: indifference. "Well, you need to do something," Seraphine insisted, her voice rising in pitch. "People are staring. They're laughing at us." Lucien's eyes scanned the room. She was right. The whispers had not subsided. The pity that had been directed at Isolde had now shifted subtly in their direction. They were the ones who looked uncomfortable, out of control. The power couple was suddenly looking like a couple in trouble. "Calm down, Seraphine," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You're making a scene." "I'm making a scene," she shot back, her voice incredulous. "Lucien, your ex-wife just showed up looking like a goddess and is now dancing with one of the most eligible bachelors in the city, and you're telling me to calm down." The transactional nature of their relationship, usually hidden beneath a veneer of shared ambition and passion, was suddenly laid bare. Seraphine had attached herself to Lucien for the power and status he provided. His public image was her public image. And right now that image was taking a serious hit. "I will handle it," Lucien said, his voice leaving no room for argument. He turned to her, his eyes cold and hard. "Go and mingle. Talk to the Vanderbilts. I'll be there in a minute." Seraphine looked like she wanted to argue, but she knew that look in his eyes. It was the look he got right before he fired someone. She gave a tight, angry nod and stalked off, her red dress, a slash of fury against the muted tones of the room. Lucien watched her go, a muscle working in his jaw. This was not how the evening was supposed to go. The gala was supposed to be a triumph, another public declaration of his success, of his new life with his new perfect partner. But Isolde's presence had thrown everything off balance. It had unearthed feelings he had thought long buried, feelings he had no desire to confront. He remembered their first dance years ago at a small, crowded wedding of a college friend. She had been so young, so full of a quiet, gentle light. He had fallen in love with that light, with her unwavering belief in him. But as his ambition grew, that light had started to feel like a judgment, a silent reminder of the man he was supposed to be, the man he was failing to become. He had convinced himself that she was holding him back, that her quiet contentment was a weight on his soaring ambition. He had told himself that leaving her was a kindness, a way of setting them both free. But looking at her now in the arms of another man, he felt a sharp, unexpected pang of something. It wasn't love. It was possession. She was his ex-wife, his past, his story. and she was rewriting it without his permission. He saw Rowena Vale watching him from across the room, a smug knowing look on her face. He saw the whispers, the curious glances. He was losing control of the narrative. And for a man like Lucian Rell, that was an unforgivable sin. He set his champagne flute down with a sharp click and started to walk towards the dance floor. He didn't know what he was going to do, what he was going to say. He just knew that he couldn't let this stand. He couldn't let her win. The cracks in his perfect world were starting to show, and he would do whatever it took to plaster them over, no matter who got hurt in the process. The music was a gentle current, and for the first time in over a year, Isolde allowed herself to be carried by it. Thane Ashford was a surprisingly good dancer, his movements confident and easy, his hand a warm, steady presence on her back. He didn't press for conversation, didn't ask the intrusive questions she had been dreading all night. He simply let her be, a silent, supportive partner in her quiet act of rebellion. "You know," he said, his voice a low murmur near her ear, "I've been to dozens of these things. They're usually a crushing bore. But tonight is different." Isolde looked up at him, a small, genuine smile on her lips. "I'm sorry if I've ruined your evening of crushing boredom." He chuckled a warm, pleasant sound. "On the contrary, you've made it infinitely more interesting." He spun her out, then gently pulled her back in. "I meant what I said earlier about your eye for art. I'm working on a new community center project in the East End. We're trying to incorporate local artists, create a space that feels like it belongs to the neighborhood. I've been struggling with the curation. I was wondering if you'd be interested in taking a look at the plans, maybe offer some suggestions." Isolde was stunned into silence. It wasn't just a compliment. It was a genuine offer, a recognition of a skill she had been told was nothing more than a hobby. It was a lifeline thrown to a part of herself she thought she had lost forever. I don't know what to say," she stammered, her composure momentarily faltering. "Say you'll think about it," he said, his eyes kind. "No pressure. I just think you'd be brilliant at it." Before she could respond, the music ended. They stood for a moment in the center of the dance floor. The applause, a distant, muted sound. The spell was broken, but something had shifted. The fortress she had so carefully constructed around her heart had a new, unexpected defender. As they walked off the floor, a new figure intercepted them. It was Rowena Vale, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of admiration and mischief. "Well, well," she said, tapping his older arm with her fan. "Causing a stir, are we? I haven't seen Lucian look that shade of pew since his hostile takeover of Sterling Industries went south." She winked at Thane. "No relation, I presume?" "None whatsoever," Thane said with a grin. "Though I do enjoy the irony. Is solder, my dear?" Rowena continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I need to borrow you for a moment. There are some people I want you to meet." She gave Thane a dismissive yet not unkind wave. "You can have her back later, Mr. Ashford. The wolves are circling, and she needs a proper shield to keep them at bay." Isolde, feeling a strange sense of being swept up in a current she couldn't control, allowed Rowena to lead her away. She glanced back at Thane, who gave her a reassuring nod. Rowena steered her towards a small group of women, all of them powerful, influential figures in the city's philanthropic scene. They were the women Isolde had once worked with, laughed with, served on committees with, the women who had sent polite, impersonal notes of condolence after the divorce, and then promptly disappeared from her life. "Ladies," Rowena announced, her voice ringing with authority, "look who I found. It's Isolde, and doesn't she look marvelous?" There was a moment of awkward silence, a collective intake of breath. Then one of the women, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret, smiled. "Isolde, it's wonderful to see you. We've missed you. The dam broke." The other women chimed in, their voices a chorus of welcome. They asked her about her life, about her plans. They didn't mention Lucian. They didn't mention Seraphine. They treated her not as a victim, but as a long-lost friend. Isolde found herself talking, really talking, for the first time in months. She told them about her pottery, about the small floral design business she was dreaming of. She didn't mention the pain, the loneliness, the long silent nights. She just talked about the future. And as she talked, she realized something profound. These women whom she had dismissed as fair-weather friends were not her enemies. They were survivors just like her, navigating a world that was often unkind to women of a certain age. Women who had been replaced by younger, shinier models. They had kept their distance not out of malice, but out of a misplaced sense of respect for her privacy, for the narrative of the fragile, heartbroken wife. Her quiet reappearance, her defiant dance, had given them permission to welcome her back. She was not a ghost to be pied. She was one of them. Rowena, her mission accomplished, stood back and watched, a satisfied smile on her face. She had not just provided a human shield. She had rebuilt a wall of support around his older brick by brick. From across the room, Lucian watched this scene unfold, a cold knot of dread tightening in his stomach. He had not just lost control of his older, he had lost control of the room. The whispers were no longer about his ex-wife's surprising appearance. They were about her triumphant return. And he, the great Lucian Rell, was quickly becoming a footnote in her story. The story he thought he had written, the story that was now being spectacularly and publicly rewritten. The atmosphere in the ballroom had shifted from a low simmer to a boiling point. The air was thick with unspoken words, with the electric tension of the story reaching its climax. Lucian, having been rebuffed by his older and dismissed by Seraphine, was a man adrift in a sea of his own making. He was used to being the center of gravity in any room, the sun around which all other planets orbited. But tonight, the celestial order had been thrown into chaos. A new sun had emerged, and it was burning with a light he could no longer control. He found Seraphine by the champagne fountain, holding court with a group of young sycophantic admirers. She was laughing, a high, brittle sound that didn't quite reach her eyes. When she saw him approaching, her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she plastered it back on. "Lucian, darling," she cooed, linking her arm through his. "We were just talking about the new marketing campaign. It's going to be revolutionary." Lucian barely heard her. His eyes were fixed on his older, who was now standing with Thane Ashford and the mayor, the three of them laughing at something Thane had said. She looked happy, genuinely, effortlessly happy. It was a look he hadn't seen on her face in years, and it felt like a physical blow. "I need to talk to you," he said to Seraphine, his voice low and urgent. He pulled her away from the group, ignoring their curious glances. He led her to a secluded alcove, the same one where years ago he had kissed his older in a moment of triumphant celebration. The irony was not lost on him. "What is it?" "Lucian?" Seraphine asked, her voice sharp with irritation. "You're embarrassing me." "I'm embarrassing you," he shot back, his control finally snapping. "Did you see her? Did you see the way they were looking at her?" "At us. Of course I saw," Seraphine said, her voice dripping with scorn. "What did you expect? That she would stay hidden in her sad little apartment forever, crying into her tea? You underestimated her, Lucian. You underestimated her, and now it's blowing up in our faces." It was the truth. And hearing it from her, from the woman who was supposed to be his partner, his ally, was like swallowing glass. "I did not underestimate her," he lied, his voice a low growl. "This is a game. She's playing a game. And she's winning," Seraphine said, her eyes hard. "Look at you, Lucian. You're unraveling. The great Lucian Rall, the master of the universe, is coming apart at the seams because his mousy little ex-wife decided to wear a nice dress and smile at another man." Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, striking at the heart of his insecurities. He had chosen Seraphine because she was like him, ruthless, ambitious, a reflection of his own desires. He had never considered that that same ruthlessness could be turned on him. "This is not about her," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "This is about us. This is about our brand, our future." "Our brand," Seraphine laughed. A cold, humorless sound. "There is no our brand, Lucien. There is your brand. I am just the latest, most fashionable accessory, and right now I'm starting to feel a little last season." The cruelty of her words stunned him into silence. He had thought they were a team, partners in a hostile takeover of the world. But he saw now that he was just a stepping stone for her, a means to an end. And with his public image tarnishing, his value was plummeting. "What are you saying?" he asked, a cold dread seeping into his bones. "I'm saying," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "that maybe I should go and talk to her. Woman to woman, apologize for the misunderstanding. Show everyone how mature and gracious I am. Maybe I can salvage something from this train wreck." It was a brilliant, vicious move. She would not only align herself with the new center of power in the room, but she would also paint him as the villain, the petty, jealous ex-husband. She would save herself and leave him to drown. "You will do no such thing," he said, his hand grabbing her arm, his grip tight. "Let go of me, Lucien," she hissed, her eyes flashing with genuine anger. "You don't own me." "I paid for that dress," he snarled, his voice a low, ugly thing. "I paid for this whole damn life you're so enjoying. You will do as I say." It was the wrong thing to say. It was the moment the last fragile thread of their connection snapped. Seraphine looked at his hand on her arm, then back at his face, her expression a mixture of disgust and triumph. "You're right," she said, her voice suddenly calm. "You did pay for it." And with a sudden sharp movement, she reached up and ripped the diamond necklace from her throat. The clasp broke, and the diamonds, a gift from him, a symbol of their partnership, scattered across the marble floor, skittering into the darkness like frightened insects. The sound, a soft metallic clatter, was shockingly loud in the sudden silence of the alcove. A few people nearby turned to look, their eyes wide with shock. "And now," Seraphine said, her voice ringing with a cold, clear finality, "it's paid in full." She turned and walked away, not back to her admirers, but towards the exit, her head held high, her red dress a defiant banner of her own liberation. Lucien was left standing alone in the alcove, the whispers and stares of the crowd closing in on him. He looked down at the scattered diamonds, each one a tiny glittering reminder of his own spectacular failure. He had come to the gala, a king. He was leaving it a fool. The unraveling was complete, and across the room he saw Isolde, her face, a mask of quiet, unreadable emotion, watching the final pathetic act of his downfall. The party was dying. The band played its last mournful song, and the constellation of power and influence began to break apart. Guests drifting towards the exit in a flurry of air kisses and empty promises to do lunch. The whispers had faded, replaced by a weary end of the night silence. The drama was over. The masks were being put away, and all that was left was the debris. A few abandoned champagne flutes, a scattering of canope napkins, and the shattered remnants of Lucien Ravel's reputation. Isolde stood on the terrace, the cool night air, a welcome balm on her flushed cheeks. She had watched the final ugly scene between Lucien and Seraphine from a distance, a silent observer of the implosion she had inadvertently triggered. She had felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just a profound, aching sadness for the man Lucien had become and for the woman she had once been, the woman who had loved him. Thane Ashford came to stand beside her, a shawl in his hands. "I thought you might be cold," he said, gently draping it over her shoulders. It was a simple, thoughtful gesture, and it almost brought her to tears. "Thank you," she said, her voice a little thick. "For everything." You did all the heavy lifting, he said, his smile warm. I just provided the dance moves. He leaned against the balustrade, looking out at the city lights. So what now? It was the question she had been asking herself for the past year. What now? The cage was gone. The ghost had been exorcised. The past had been faced. The future was a blank canvas, both terrifying and exhilarating. I think, she said, a slow, tentative smile spreading across her face. I'm going to open a flower shop. It sounded so small, so simple after the grand dramatic events of the evening, but it was hers. It was real. I think, said, his eyes twinkling. That's a brilliant idea, and I think I know a certain community center that would be very lucky to have your designs at its grand opening. Isolde laughed. A real unburdened sound. It felt good. She saw Lucien. Then he was standing near the entrance alone. His shoulders were slumped, his usual air of arrogant confidence completely gone. He looked lost, a king without a kingdom. Their eyes met across the deserted ballroom. There was no anger in his gaze, no blame, just a deep, hollow emptiness. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of defeat, of surrender. And then he turned and walked out into the night. Isolde knew in that moment that it was truly over. Not just the marriage, but the hold he had on her, the pain, the anger, the love, the hate. It was all fading, replaced by a quiet, peaceful sense of closure. She turned to Thun, the city lights reflected in her eyes. I should go, she said. Can I walk you out? He asked. I'd like that, she replied. As they walked through the grand, empty ballroom, her heels clicking on the marble floor, Isolde felt a sense of lightness she hadn't felt in years. She was not Lucien Rawls' ex-wife. She was not a victim. She was not a ghost. She was Isolde, a woman who had walked into a den of lions and emerged not unscathed, but stronger. A woman who was finally, after a long and painful journey, ready to step into the dawn of her own life. The silence that awaited her in her penthouse would no longer be an enemy. It would be a friend, a space to be filled, not with the echoes of the past, but with the promise of a future she would build with her own two hands. And so Isolde walks out, not into the darkness, but into the dawn of her new life. Her story is a powerful reminder that our greatest strength is often forged in our deepest pain. It's about more than just an ex-wife getting revenge. It's about reclaiming your own story, refusing to be a footnote in someone else's narrative. What did you think of Isolde's journey? Could you relate to her struggle and her quiet triumph? Let us know in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who might need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of resilience, redemption, and the incredible power of the human spirit. Thank you for watching.